That's all right.
Alright, you want me to hang out in front of you, or you want me to stand by the podium?
You can sit down if you want.
You can sit down. Why don't we
Like on.
slide one of these chairs
just like-
around?
Nope.
Oh, there.
Let me just give you a nice layer
Yeah,
here.
like layer it
Oh,
up.
yeah.
So I'm not like touching your feet while we talk.
Okay.
So, because I'm awkward, stuff like that would happen. How's that?
Okay, and so since I've asked you the most questions, I'm gonna let
the questions.
Erica and Nikki start, and maybe Nikki, would you like?
Let's go back and forth.
Okay. Okay, great. So really great work here. I think you have some really interesting nuances of what's going on from the transition from one group to the next.
Mhm.
I think one of the most important points you make is that these advocacy groups look different when they transition from the folks in the Hemlock Society who founded it, you said, were people who had lived experience of like their loved one dying, and one was a grief counselor. And then when that transitioned to a nurse practitioner and a physician, Timothy Quill and Coombs Lee, she was a nurse practitioner, I believe,
And a JD.
and a JD,
Mhm.
that it shifted towards like this should become medicalized, like a medicalized event.
Mm-hmm.
So I have one comment and then one question. So when you start out, you talk about how this is an important shift in the 20th century, and that's true, but I think you need to narrow your scope and say that this is an important change in the mid to late 20th century.
Okay.
So at the 20th century, we've got things like even in the mid 20th century, the introduction of artificial respiration, we've got renal dialysis, and suddenly this threw medicine for a loop where they were like, we could keep people alive much longer than we thought we could. You start with the National Cancer Institute and the AIDS epidemic, which is even later than that. So just, you don't have to address the whole history of how medicine became, how medicine took death into its purview.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to go with that because that's not what you're doing, but just narrow your definition of your time period.
Right
Yeah,
here. Okay.
exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so my question is, so hospice and palliative care come onto the scene in late 70s for hospice, 80s and 90s for palliative care, mid 90s for palliative medicine as a subspecialty of American medicine.
Okay.
So this is around the same time as your advocacy groups start talking. So what I was thinking about when I was reading this is that Coombs Lee like predicates her argument on this should be an option of last resort when palliative care fails.
Mm-hmm.
So what is that relationship between these death with dignity groups and hospice and palliative care who are like, well, you're fundamentally making the argument that we are not doing end of life well, and that there's a limit to our expertise, and that's when death with dignity comes in. And I get that they're making that argument because that's more palatable to the American public. Like, we want you to do hospice and palliative care, but when that doesn't work anymore, then you can do. So in some of your research and what you were reading, have you found that the palliative medicine and hospice movement and death with dignity are comrades? Are they partners? Or does palliative care say no, we don't do death with dignity?
I don't think that hospice care is entirely supportive of death with dignity. From what I've seen, it's more the advocacy group speaking that they should be used together. I think that hospice definitely believes, as a larger movement, of course, not just individual pieces of it, but that death with dignity is detracting from, or not, physician-aided dying is detracting from hospice usage and from the mission statement of hospice, because they are still on the just support and do no harm and help people to die peacefully, not help people actually actively end life. And so I do think that there is a disconnect between hospice as an actual entity and the hospice training, hospice mission statements, and using physician-aided dying. I wouldn't be able to speak on that, though, as clearly in states where it is legal to pursue physician-aided dying. I think this is more of a situation in places where it's not legal, and they're commenting on policy proposals or people requesting it and saying that's not what we do.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think you're right. I sit on the Hospice of the Valley Ethics Committee, and we were recently talking about voluntary stopping of eating and drinking, and someone
Passive,
end stage dementia. She can't decide whether or not she wants to keep eating or drinking. This is like
Substitute
hand
judgment.
feeding, yeah. But these daughters were asking for it, and Hospice of the Valley was like, not only do we not totally feel comfortable doing that, but we have a public persona that if people find out, you can come here and we'll stop feeding and
Your loved ones.
Yeah, like we're undermining. People are already scared of hospice, and they have a PR problem. So I think that maybe addressing somewhere in here that relationship between hospice and palliative care and aid and dying, and not conflating the two, but saying like, do they really work together? Timothy Quill wants to say yes, but my sense is that hospice and palliative care are like, no, people don't even want to talk to us. They think that we're the harbingers of death. So
Well, there's like that huge argument too with all of these practices that we're ruining the credibility of the medical profession as well, not just hospice, but doctors in general, that patients aren't going to want to enter the medical system when they're dying. At these levels, they'll just stay with their oncology doctors or other, like they won't even ask for other options because they think that it will be like death will be forced on them rather than like letting it go up to a natural point and then talking about what do we do now. So
So yeah, to point out that is a particular framing of the advocacy groups, that this is a
that it's coming from
continuum.
the lens.
they're
Right.
framing themselves rhetorically as such.
But that the other groups might not agree.
They might not agree. They might not agree.
No, that's
Yeah.
actually I haven't even touched on that. That's an excellent point.
And I don't think it
This
needs
is
to be
one
this
lens.
huge.
Yeah.
But it is. It's one lens of how they frame themselves.
They should be conflated together. Okay, no, that's a great point. I would love to actually elaborate on that because I don't want to send the wrong message with this paper that this is all that we believe. So
Right.
All right, thank you.